You'd be right.
Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Solari Report. We're recording this on April 20th, 2019. This is Catherine Austin Fitz. I'm with Dr. Joseph Farrell. Before we started, I just wanted to touch base and talk a little bit about something that didn't happen the first quarter. It just happened. Last week, I was in the dental chair for a 4-hour root canal, and the dentist walked in and said, "Oh my God, Notre Dame is burning."
Yeah.
So we've had a fire at Notre Dame, and I think for many of us, it's a very devastating thing to have happen. It's a little bit like the California fires, because what has happened, it's another situation where the official story makes no sense.
Yeah.
But then we don't have the facts of what really happened. So we're back in, Never Neverland. But, you wrote a very great post immediately. I don't know how you do it so fast, that described the fact that this is the 13th fire of vandalism in a relatively short period of time in France. And I just spent last year running around France, going to some of the cathedrals. And, that energy, the energy of their sacred places and and Christendom is unbelievably powerful in France.
Yeah.
And so for this to happen, it's one person said it's like in the movie Avatar, they're going for the home tree.
Uh-huh.
So tell us a little bit about what you think this means.
Well, it's difficult really to put into words, and I still struggle with it. Notre Dame it's a Gothic cathedral. It's on the Ile-de-France. So in other words, it's considered, that island that it's on is considered the center of France.
Right.
And in fact, if you look at the way the French measure the kilometers on their roads, it's all measured from Notre Dame.
Oh, I
Did you
didn't know that.
That's kilometer zero.
So that's central.
That is the Ile-de-France. That's the island of France.
Oh, God, I didn't know that.
And that's just the secular aspect of it. Napoleon was crowned there. Some of the French kings and so on and so forth. And just from the secular standpoint, it's important. But for me, the core issue of it, the symbolism of it, is this is a cathedral built to enshrine and memorialize the Incarnation. And that means, in a certain sense, it's a shrine to God becoming man, so that man might become God, and it's dedicated, to Our Lady, to the Mother of God. So it's also it's a shrine to the Christian version, if you will, of the sacred feminine as well as the sacred masculine, if you put it in those kind of abstract terms.
The thing that struck me the most about Chart was this incredible balance between the sacred male and the sacred female together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
no conflict.
There's no conflict, and it's it's an expression of that classical formulation of the doctrine. And so, to me, it's kind of a symbol that, the way I view it, it's a symbol of a warning that we've got to understand that this is at the core of our culture, this idea of incarnate reason, and that doctrine, even to a certain extent, makes possible the secular critique of it.
Right.
So, in other words, you really don't even have the possibility of a European Enlightenment without that central doctrine. So it's a symbol of a lot of things operating all at the same time. And it's, to watch it burn, you're watching a symbolic metaphor of the torching of Western civilization. That's why I just thought it was such a tragedy.
Well, if you want people to resonate with the machines instead of the divine,
yeah, that's what you do.
You want to take the fields that are the most powerful,
right,
and the symbols that are the most powerful. And, to me, the symbolism was, we don't need the mandate of heaven. We can do everything by force.
Exactly.
We can, and we intend to do everything by force.
Exactly.
So just give up now.
Yeah, exactly. And, we were talking about that last night. That sort of approach to things won't work because without any sort of unifying cultural core, conceptual core, anybody, it's if you're trying to do things without the mandate of heaven, then it's this group versus that group. There's, it's anarchy, it's chaos, it's
Well,
mob
it's the many
rule.
night thing.
It's mob. So to me, it's a symbol of a lot of things. It's kind of a warning. It's a metaphor for what we've allowed to happen to our culture.
Well, I've said this many times. You've heard me say this many times. I worked with the neocons in the first Bush administration,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't know they need the mandate of heaven. They're
No,
crazy.
yeah, they're nuts.
They're nuts. They're
Yeah.
just completely nuts. And
Yeah.
but they don't know they're nuts. They're just like, Leonard Cohen has this great line: "We were blinded by the beauty of our weapons." It was like whatever they cooked up on Star Wars, they lost their mind thinking,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, our power advantage is so great. We don't need any of that stuff."
Yeah, the other thing that's important that it's a symbol of is the ability of this civilization in its core concepts to correct itself. Somebody posted after I had posted that blog, posted a kind of a snotty comment, and it was in the form of a cartoon, a 6-panel cartoon, where 5 of the panels were talking about all of the abuses of the medieval church, this typical stuff, Inquisition and so on and so forth, and that's all true.
Right.
But the final panel was a picture of an imam, a Muslim, saying, "We're here in peace." And talk about a cartoon version of both religions and their history, total cartoon version. And this was posted as kind of a snotty comment to what I had said. And that upset me too, because what was burning there was a religion which has had a profound ability to correct itself, even in its own abuses.
Right.
And it's been able to do that. I mean, as late as William Wilberforce in Great Britain getting rid of the slave trade. Well, it was coming out of a reflection on the central core doctrines of the religion itself that produced that whole movement. So you're also watching being torched something that is crucial to this civilization, and that's its ability to correct itself.
Right.
After some profound reflection on what the central core really means.
Right.
So, it's operating on so many different ways that I find profoundly disturbing. And you would have had a similar reaction, but not something so stark had it been, say, the cathedral at Reims or Chartres or Cologne or something like this, because this, as I said, this is also the heart of France.
Right.
It's the Ile de France.
Well, Macron has been trying to destroy French culture ever since he opened his mouth.
Yeah. I mean, he gets up at the Verdun Memorial, the Battle of Verdun, and says there's no such thing as French culture. And, and he's standing in the middle of cemeteries of thousands of dead Frenchmen, that were fighting to preserve their country. And
well, if you look at the market capitalization of French stocks,
mm-hmm.
It proves very concretely that there is such a thing as French culture,
Mm-hmm.
and people love it.
Mm-hmm.
And you could wipe out significant market capitalization if you destroy it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
It's just it's a symbol that operates on so many levels, both secular and theological, that another cathedral somewhere else would not have had that same effect. I mean, you're literally torching not just central core.
Yeah, you're trying to
doctrine.
you're trying to break France's heart.
Yeah, and you're torching something also very specific to France. And
well, Macron was going to give his response to the Yellow Jackets that night, and it was canceled. And that was the response to the Yellow Jackets.
Yeah,
if you push this, we'll break your heart.
Yeah.
So I wanted to mention something because I think for our subscribers and your members, there's something here they need to hear. And that is, if you look at, every year I republish the Vermont Oyster Christmas essay. I don't know if you know it, In Hoc Anno Domini. But I just wanted to read how it ends. Along the road to Damascus, the light shone brightly, but afterwards Paul of Tarsus was sore afraid. He feared that other Caesars, other prophets, might one day persuade men that man was nothing save a servant unto them, that men might yield up their birthright from God for pottage and walk no more in freedom. Then might it come to pass that darkness would settle again over the lands, and there would be a burning of books, and men would think only of what they could eat and what they should wear, and would heed only to new Caesars and to false prophets. Then might it come to pass that men would not look upward to see even a winter star in the east, and once more there would be no light at all in the darkness. And so Paul, the apostle of the Son of Man, spoke to his brethren, the Galatians, the words he would have us remember afterwards in each of the years of his Lord. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ has made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. And so whether it's the European Enlightenment or the Scottish Enlightenment, which I would say gave us ultimately the Constitution, if you look at what's standing between these folks and what they want to accomplish, to me, in the United States, the Constitution is standing in between. But this sacred tradition is really what's standing in between.
Yes.
And if you read the Founding Fathers, they all said, if we give that tradition up, you can't have, what's in you can't have what's in the Constitution unless you have that in the culture.
Yeah, and the that whole thing reminds me of C.S. Lewis's observation that the modernist materialist is really a materialist magician. They're men without chests, as he liked to call them. In other words, it's all brain and brawn, but no heart. And, that's, in a certain sense, what also burned. And it's...
The hyper-materialists don't realize that.
No, they don't.
They think it's just a building, and
they think it's a building.
Rebuild the building, and everything's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't have any rootedness in anything that, I use the observation of, it's horribly out of place, but during the Soviet purge trials, the Trotskyites were basically referred to in Soviet propaganda of the era as being rootless cosmopolitans, which describes them perfectly.
Right.
And it describes the kind of materialist reaction that you're describing. That was just a building, an old building that burned, which it was not. Yeah,
they have no concept of, well, you would call it theology and culture.
Yeah, none.
But they have no, it's like anything that is not physically visible doesn't exist. And they don't know it exists. And it's funny because I've had several interactions with people who I would describe as materialists or hyper-materialists. And they're lovely people. They really don't know.
Yeah, they don't.
Right. It's just like they can't see EMF radiation, so it's not real, it doesn't exist. They can't see GMO seeds, so it doesn't exist. A cucumber is a cucumber. Even though science has proved that a cucumber grown with healthy methods has much more I don't know what you would call it, energetically, it has more energy. Science has documented that.
The irony of it is that this whole hyper-materialism manifests itself at the same time that within physics, increasingly, it's becoming more and more apparent that it's not the physical aspect of physics, the material aspect. It's
right.
The immaterial. It's the consciousness aspect and
right.
the things that are
right.
the important things. So, it's, in a way, it's a symbol of that great divide that's happening all over again. We've been through it before in our history. We're going through it again. And
well, wasn't Newton really put there to separate them?
I would ascribe that more to Descartes than to Newton.
Okay.
But yeah.
But there was a real effort to use, intellectual tools to keep them, the separation of church and state.
Right.
And I'll never forget when my uncle got mad at me during the litigation. He said, "God is for the weekends. You don't bring God to work." No, but that was all part of this, it's separate. And I used to go to churches, when I traveled around America, trying to figure out how we could be the most warlike nation in the history of the world, but say we were, 70% of the people say they're Christian. And I discovered,
Hmm.
oh, you go to church on Sunday and you get washed in the blood, and then you go out and kill the rest of the week,
Hmm.
and then you come back and you're washed in the blood. It's like you know, it's like that advertisement, you know, wash, rinse, repeat.
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
Right.
exactly. There's no attempt to understand what the religion is actually teaching in terms of self-discipline and virtue and reining in the passions and being responsible.
Well, but the other thing is they don't understand the incredible power and opportunity of being righteous.
You know,
It's there's real power there. And the reality is, unless you want to go along with this kind of fascism, that's your alternative.
yeah.
My favorite quote of the week, probably of the year, was the French official who got thrown off of Fox News for saying this. But he said, even the Nazis didn't
Didn't
dare
do this.
destroy Notre Dame. Even the Nazis.
Nazis. Yeah.
And to me, that is so powerful because, you're talking about a nihilism which is
Yes.
greater than Hitler's.
Yeah.
That's what we're dealing with.
Yeah. It is a nihilism
Yeah.
that is attacking anything of transcendental value and transcendental merit and beauty.
So you have told us, and you're the one who sort of got me going down this pathway that, I've been doing with Food for the Soul and other things on the Solari Report. You said we have to own the culture.
Hmm.
So let's just take a few minutes before we finish this and explain, if I'm listening to this and I want to own the culture, what do I do? What does it mean?
Well, first of all, I think it means we have to become theologically literate again because this is at the core of this civilization, like it or not. And that doesn't mean you necessarily have to believe it, but you have to understand it in enough detail, for example, to understand, we've got a doctrine of corporate personhood in the West, and it's been part of our legal tradition since the Middle Ages.
Hmm.
And this is what people don't understand. And it's coming out of certain theological formulations that were unique to the Western Church. And those formulations, in turn, affected jurisprudence and law.
Hmm.
And the same thing could be said of science, too. If you look at Western culture, if you look at Christian culture, it's unique in one huge respect that no other culture has had. And this, I think, accounts for the rise of modern science in this culture. And that's, again, going back to the idea of incarnation. If you've got a doctrine that says a transcendental principle of reason is both personal, and then that transcendental principle becomes human, what you're really saying there is you've broken that old classical wall between one law for the heavens and another law for the earth. It's the same principle that encompasses everything.
Right.
And therefore you are creating a metaphysical foundation for the rise of modern science in that doctrine. So there's so much going on here. So that's the first thing I would say. And then the second thing I would say, if you want to own the culture, is you have to understand how that specific core principle begins to affect everything culturally. Because what you're really saying is we've got a personalized cosmological principle that enters human life. So every aspect of human life becomes sacred, and with the result that every creative human endeavor in the sciences, in the arts, literature, and so on is serving that principle. So this is why you see this explosion of art in the Middle Ages and so on and so forth. And if we don't understand that, then if we jettison that principle, we end up with what? Well, we end up with Jackson Pollock.
Right.
We end up with Arnold Schoenberg and all of this ugliness that we're surrounded by now. And most of that art, if you look at it, in my opinion, most of that modernist art is another example of nihilism,
Yeah.
because it's an attack on beauty, it's an attack on virtue, it's an attack on goodness,
It's an attack on humanity.
it's an attack on humanity.
So you described last night the fact that we're living off the husk um, of a culture.
Mm-hmm.
And what I said was, we can't save necessarily all of the physical infrastructure. We can't save the financial infrastructure. There are parts of it we can't save, but what we can preserve
Mm-hmm.
is the culture.
Right.
We can preserve our connection to the sacred. We can preserve the culture. We can nurture something that can be enduring.
Right.
That's what we can do.
Right.
And that's now for each person it's different.
It's going to be different.
Yeah.
Right. There's no magic formula here. That's the other part of this.
One of the things that strikes me I just got back from 2 months in Europe, and I was in places where there are so many people supporting the artists and the musicians in those activities.
Mm-hmm.
And in France, the churches are packed,
Mm-hmm.
and the organ concerts are packed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny when you go out to dinner with people, that's what they're talking about.
Right.
They're not talking about, the Mueller report. They're talking about, who did better playing Bach at this way, So
Mm-hmm.
it's a much, they're totally owning the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And, and we can do that. There's nothing to stop
Sure
us
we
from
can.
doing that.
Sure we can. The problem that we're faced with is it's going to require hard work. In other words, we've got to become literate in the culture to begin with in order to preserve it. And most people, unfortunately, in this country, as opposed to Europe, don't have that grounding. And every
Well,
effort,
I'm
every
still
effort has been
I'm
made.
trying to get you to start a school to teach it.
Well, no. The problem is you mentioned school, and that's a good point, because uh, every effort in this country seems to be made in the education establishment to cut people off from
Oh
any
yeah, yeah,
sort
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
tradition. Our own history.
Right, but I see tremendous hunger
Oh yeah, I do too.
for education in this,
I do too.
so I mean I just know the process I've gone through trying to understand what you're saying.
Well, you made a good point about the founding fathers came up with the Constitution, and they were very explicit that this
Right.
is coming out of a culture. Lose the culture, you lose the political institutions.
Right.
And part of restoring some semblance of constitutionality to this country is going to require a cultural aspect and not a political one.
Right, but John Edward Hurley said to me, one of my favorite quotes, this culture is the integration of the divine in everyday life. We still,
Yeah.
as you were saying last night, we have to go back and understand, what are the architectural principles of what that sacred is.
Right.
And that's,
Right.
I just ordered a complete works of Thomas Aquinas.
Oh,
More to
wow.
read.
Yeah. Well, the problem is, yes, these cathedrals, and I think I mentioned this last night, and this is why Notre Dame in particular is so significant. It would be like St. Peter's in Rome burning, or Canterbury Cathedral burning, because what you have in those Gothic cathedrals is an entire detailed cosmology that is put into architecture.
Right.
And that's the other part of this that people don't get. And again, it's going to require, to understand that from that perspective, it's going to require some hard digging and getting into things.
There's before I visited Chartres and Mont Saint Michel, I watched an incredible number of documentaries about the building of the great cathedrals,
Mm-hmm.
and there is a lot of documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to educate yourself about the cathedrals, it's something that the materialists there's been a great deal of studying and documentation, and I just have to tell you one story on this note. When I was in Italy, I was going around with Nina Hine, who writes Food for the Soul, and she is an encyclopedia on all these artists. It's amazing what she knows. But one of the things she explained to me is that Da Vinci had done incredible work on anatomy.
Mm-hmm.
And when he died, all of his publications and notes and documents and drawings on science and the circulatory system, he really unpacked and figured out the circulatory system. If you look at who it was turned over to, it was never published. And if you look at what he had discovered about the circulatory system, if it had been published, our medical science really stayed in the dark for centuries,
Yes.
without that publication.
Right.
And if you look at the lost opportunity, it's really frightening. So then I go up to Amsterdam, and after we go to the Rijksmuseum, which is amazing, we go to the Van Gogh Museum, and I read the story that I had never read of Van Gogh's sister-in-law. Van Gogh dies in his 30s, having never sold a painting. But his brother and his brother's wife are complete believers in Van Gogh and what he's doing. His brother dies 6 months later, and his brother's wife, keeps the collection together and markets it for decades, and manages to keep the whole thing together. And it is her success as a publisher that then puts Van Gogh on the map. And you look at these two situations and you say, there, but for a good publisher. It shows you the power of somebody taking the time to document and publish. And without that role, these things, and I hate to say it, the folks who do things like burn cathedrals, they depend on that suppression of knowledge.
Yeah, and it's we can look at it as a metaphor too of the fragility of our culture.
Right.
It's a warning, as far as I'm concerned, that we've got to either use it or lose it.
Right.
And I was thinking as it was burning, what would happen if all of a sudden we lost all of the music scores of Beethoven, or something
Right.
similar. And it's fragile. And this is another thing I mean by own the culture. Whatever
culture.
Yeah, well, whatever turns you on in this culture, immerse yourself in it. If it's music, buy music scores, or if it's art, buy prints or paintings and learn about it. But crucial to it is understanding the core concepts of it, and you cannot do that by having an exclusively secular approach to it.
Right.
The age of theological illiteracy and quote-unquote spirituality and all these glittering generalities that get tossed around, that's over. That's over.
The challenge for me is I'm not a minister. I don't want to minister.
No, I know.
To people.
Yeah.
But I also know that without that connection, you can't survive this.
Well, you can't. It's not just a matter of surviving it. Without that understanding, you can't understand the culture.
Right.
It's that simple. And we've immersed ourselves in a kind of secularism for so long that we've forgotten the other pillars of this culture, and that's why it's not making any sense to us.
I have to tell you, being in Chartres and Mont Saint Michel was so helpful to just. I mean, those fields in France are unbelievably powerful.
Of course they are. Of course they are. You're breathing in a very long history.
Right.
It's a secular thing as well as a religious thing that we saw burn, and I don't think all of these people, these millionaires rushing to rebuild, have any clue of really what it is that they think that they're going to try and rebuild.
Well, it's interesting because the the organ music is such an important part of those cathedrals, and the organ music is so popular. The organ concerts are just packed. At Chart, they were just packed. There's a big competition at Chart every year, and so there's an instinctive desire for it. And that's why the danger, of course, is if you burn up all these places, then where do people go to
hear it?
Well, it's like an oasis. Where do they go to drink?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what inspired that music? That's the important thing. What inspired that music? And I guarantee you, it wasn't Immanuel Kant. It wasn't Hegel, folks.
Anyway, okay, well, I did want to mention that when Macron announced that they were going to have an international competition, it was immediately after an architect. The architects, both on 9/11 and now on Notre Dame, are giving the team from, I call it the nothing.
Yep.
Giving the team from the nothing, they're giving them a run for the money. But an architect got on TV. He'd been the architect responsible for Notre Dame for 13 years. He said he had no idea how this could happen because oak doesn't burn that fast. You notice when Trump first got on television and talked about it, he talked about the high degree temperature fire. But oak doesn't burn this fast. If you look at the technology they had to stop fires, it was the most advanced, sophisticated stuff. So they were very much, up to date. And they have 2 people apparently on staff all the time just watching for fires.
Yep.
So this couldn't happen. Ha. So you wonder, okay, well, how did it happen? Immediately after he's on TV saying that, Macron announces, we're going to rebuild using an international competition of architects. And I interpreted the message as, if you don't shut up,
Yeah, we're going to give you something garish. And that, an international competition. Well, this means you're opening up a rebuilding of the structure to cultures that have no idea or clue or grounding in what produced it in the first place.
Right.
To them, it's mere art. It's not mere art. It's theology in stone. And it's not Muslim theology. It's not Jewish theology. It's not Buddhist theology. It's Christian theology.
Right.
So, an international competition, as far as I'm concerned, is going to produce a modernist monstrosity, an ecumenical love-in, whatever.
Well, it's what Rappaport said. It's one of my favorite lines from John. Hopelessness is an op and it's planet-wide. So we reject the op. Ta-da!
Ta-da!
They didn't get the rose window.